I've spent a lot of time on Lies of P in the last year, and before Lies of P's release and after, there have been other Souls-like titles that I may visit at another time. At the moment, though, there is one Souls-like title on the way that I would like to visit, and that's Anatria the Last Song. And since the demo is out, I thought I would give my first impressions on it. I'll admit that when the first trailer for this game released, it didn't pique my interest at all, but after playing the demo, my mind has since changed. Now, this game was originally set to release a couple of weeks before Shadow of the Erd Tree, and I'm glad it didn't. Originally, I thought that this game might have gotten overlooked if it did. Now I don't think it would have, but I definitely think that the folks at Jamma Games would have had a long day ahead of them trying to compete with the long-anticipated Elden Ring DLC. Since this is a first impressions video of a demo, how I review this will be different. I will be going into the good, the bad, and what I hope to see when the game releases. And I'm not going to be extremely critical, if at all, seeing as this is not a finished product, and a lot could change from the demo to the actual release. And this is a team that has only developed mobile games, so already they're making quite the jump when developing something like Anatria. And not to mention, this group of devs only has about 5 years under their belt as a team as well, but I understand everyone has to start somewhere. With that out of the way, let's jump into the good parts of Anatria the Last Song. With everything that you can do in Anatria, I really thought that there would be issues with bloated controls and mechanics, but nope, it's actually quite the opposite. Every bit of the button mapping makes sense and the accessibility is great. From healing to being able to swap out your items and weapons, you'll have a seamless time doing so. One of the best aspects about healing is that it's in its own box, so you don't have to put it into your quick items. You simply hit the triangle button and you're healed. That isn't the only thing though. You can even switch between your mask loadouts pretty quickly as well, which leads me to the next good thing, and that's having different loadouts. How many times have you played a Souls and Souls-like title and had to adapt to going into your menu to find the items and weapons you need while in combat, or had to keep managing your quick items after every encounter? Well, no more of that. With mask loadouts, you can manage all of that in one fell swoop. You can select your tools, masks, mask lines, perks, and aspects between 3 loadouts, and that's a pretty convenient mechanic that I kinda wish the other titles had. And all you have to do to switch between your loadouts is hit down on the D-pad. So no more menu surfing in the middle of fights anymore, because now you have everything at your disposal with the press of a button. On top of that, it meshes extremely well with the controls that I listed off earlier. So when you switch between your quick items, it's as simple as hitting left and right on the D-pad, square to use these items, and up on the D-pad to switch between weapons. And each item and weapon will differ between the mask loadouts. It all flows well. And I am exaggerating a little bit on not having the menu surf because you do still need to set these things up, but it's not at all time consuming. This also gives the player more options to experiment with different playstyles and more choices for how the player is going to tackle the game. So now everything is right there with you at all times without having to surf through 5 other menus. Speaking of which, I would really like to thank Jamma for not menu bloating us to death. I love Souls and Souls-like titles, but sometimes finding your items can feel more like a job than it needs to. And while you do have a separate inventory menu that you can go to, it's really nice to just be able to select what you need from your loadout menu. I've talked about how the controls work and how everything flows together, and the combat movements flow just as seamlessly, especially since it's the same song and dance as most Souls and Souls-like titles. Dodging, running, light and heavy attacks works the same with the added jump button like in Elden Ring, but this game has a really great parry system. While it does work with precise timing and you suffer the consequences through chip damage to your health and the risk of losing stamina, it doesn't feel so dire to perform, meaning that this is actually the most forgiving parry system I have ever dealt with in a Souls-like game. Period. I mean, the enemies and bosses have some of the most telling attacks, and you don't have to parry almost at last minute to pull it off. In fact, you might find it easier to master than with most of the other Souls-like titles. And the stagger for normal enemies when pulling off parrying is absolutely brutal on them. In cases of pulling off a proper parry on stronger enemies, you can wear them down quicker, and you actually can see when you're wearing them down through more than just their health bar. Just like Sekiro's posture bar, enemies have an unraveling meter, and you can unravel enemies by damaging and parrying them. Upon filling that meter, you can deal serious damage to your enemies through normal critical attacks, but it also puts your character in the state of awakening, giving you positive buffs depending on which mask you wear, further rewarding you for your efforts. Now, the leveling system is just like most of your Souls-like titles that enhances your health, stamina, elemental defenses, and so on and so forth. And once again, you get the convenience of being able to level up at and fast travel from any reality knot that you visit. You can even take care of your loadouts from these points. On top of the leveling system, you can unlock skills that further add to your attributes, some which you can select for your loadouts. And normally in these titles, you have to go to someone to upgrade your weapons. Well, not in Anatria. Here you have a space that, from what I've seen, appeared next to 2 reality knots where you can upgrade not just your weapons, but your mask and mask lines. So you have everything at your disposal, and you have a lot of options to help you tackle the challenges of this game. The last thing I want to cover is the map design. It's not unlike anything that we haven't seen in any other Souls and Souls-like game, but I will say that the scenery feels more festive than anything else. Even this area didn't give me the dark and gloomy feeling that most titles of this ilk normally do, and I think that's a good thing. I'll admit that one big problem that I have with Souls is that one of the series' greatest aspects, which is its dark and gloomy scenery, ends up becoming overwhelmingly depressing to me after a while, which I will say that if it gives me that feeling, then the game has done its job. I didn't feel any of that in this game though. Even an area like this one, which looks like it's supposed to be gloomy, doesn't give me that feeling. Regardless, everything is cohesive and well designed, giving you the normal shortcuts that lead back to areas you've already been to. And while that's not unique, what is unique is when we start talking about reality glyphs and rifts. Rifts simply change reality for a certain period of time in certain places. You'll find items that you wouldn't be able to find in the area's normal state. However, these rifts can also spawn enemies that weren't there in its normal state as well. Glyphs seem to be more permanent, adding a way to travel to the areas you need to get to until you cross over them, placing objects like this bridge where it wasn't before. Maybe unique isn't the right word, seeing as Lords of the Fallen does this as well, taking you through the Umbral Realm to get to new places. The risks from Lords of the Fallen aren't in Anatria though, and it doesn't seem like using glyphs and rifts will be nearly as complicated either. From what we've gone over, you can see that what we have here is a game that has more than enough to help the player not only get through the game, but to be as creative as they want to be, all while providing a Souls-like experience while bringing its own style to the table. But not everything is good. In fact, it has its fair share of bad as well. Let me start this section off by saying that the bad really isn't too bad, seeing as most of the things that I will be discussing just involve some fixing here and there. And one thing that I will say is just a minor nitpick, but nothing that actually affects the game at all, and that is, well, the menu. This is only a minor nitpick because, as I said before, you don't have to menu surf like you do in the other Souls-like titles due to the fact that you have 3 loadouts to work with. But if you find yourself in a situation where you have to surf in combat, then good luck. What we have is a menu that takes up the entirety of the screen once again, and as with all of these titles, you're going to be taking damage if you don't have everything situated. And you can't move while in the menu. Another reason why this is only a minor nitpick, because in a game where you have everything at your disposal to make things as convenient as possible, if you ever have to menu surf in tight situations, that is completely and utterly your fault. So if you have everything situated, you will be fine without having to navigate through it during those times. However, one thing that I will say that is an issue is the primal elements. Primal elements serve the same purpose as the affliction of other Souls and Souls-like titles. However, they are much different. Now, what I'm about to say may have some of you questioning why this wasn't put into the good category, and honestly, I probably would have if what came after this part didn't go with it. Primal elements actually works for you in their own twisted ways. For instance, the first one that you encounter is V's, which causes dizziness, grants the player the ability to deal more damage and regenerate stamina faster, but your defenses are lowered in return. Doesn't seem so bad, right? Well, in an average game of this genre, you normally don't see stat effects like this so soon. And this would work a lot better if the enemies at the beginning of the game didn't carry the ability to inflict these effects. Which leads me to our next problem. Not only do some of the enemies have the ability to inflict Vs on you, but they also feel extremely unbalanced power-wise. I've seen people talk about how the weapons are the problem, and honestly, I just don't see this as the case at all. Some of the enemies that you face at the beginning can feel like absolute damage sponges, and if that's not bad enough, some, while not only having the ability to inflict primal elements on you, also deal a lot of damage. And even if you parry them perfectly, they still do chip damage to your health. And the only enemies that I can understand this happening with is the main bosses. Oh yeah, and I can understand enemies like this being that strong because, well, this is actually pretty common in the Souls genre. But these little guys should not be able to destroy the player at the beginning like this. I also can't forget that some of these guys surprise attack you as well. Once you get to Quinta, you won't know who's out to get you. Like this guy here is just hanging out drinking, but who would expect these guys who are obviously having the time of their lives to attack you? Not to mention this guy who was in the middle of smithing, all of a sudden turning his somehow extremely powerful hammer on you. So with that being said, I think that the beginning enemies need their attacks and defenses toned down a bit. This next part I'm not going to be too harsh on because I think this might have been the end of the demo and there were other parts of the game that they had locked off, but once you reach this point, you will see that this game is kind of broken. Not unplayable broken, just a few things that need to be worked out. For instance, some of the enemies I fought in this area would just stand there and give up in the middle of the fight. When I fell here, it took me 5 seconds to die because I was falling through the map. But that's not all, because as you can see, I was clearly touching water here, but in another part of the map, I touched water, was walking through it, and just died out of nowhere. So there are some boundaries for the map that aren't quite established and could definitely use some work as well as some of the enemy animations. Now I was going to bring up the fact that this game suffers a little from the scenery problem in Dark Souls 2, seeing as 1 minute you're enjoying what appears to be a rising sun and within a few steps you're in a night sky, but in a game where you can bend reality, one could make the argument that it might just be a part of the story. So I have no real complaints there. Other than that, there's really nothing else that I found wrong with this game. So all in all, this title does look promising still. With all of the good and the bad out of the way, this title holds so much potential to do something great. For instance, with the ability to bend reality through glyphs and rifts, I hope that we get to see them capitalize on this feature by creating areas that strictly use this feature to progress, or use the time limit of rifts to traverse the areas while fighting more balanced enemies. One thing that they didn't really get into in the demo was the story of the game, in which I really hope we get to see some great elements come out of this in terms of the folklore that's being introduced. I also hope to see some of the same mystery that we see in other Souls-like titles as well that help drive a deeper narrative. Through the demo alone, they have shown they have no need for a lot of cutscenes, so that in itself is promising. One last thing that I would love to see is a boss or two that also uses the parry mechanic. While Curtis was definitely a challenge, it would be nice to see them up the ante a tad bit when it comes to this game's bosses. And that's it. Let me say to the folks at JAMA that coming from developing mobile games, what you have here is something with potential, and I salute you all for what's been shown so far. Anatria the Last Song is set to release September 18th, and I'm looking forward to seeing the full game. Did anyone else play the demo? If so, tell me your thoughts on it in the comments below. And as usual, you all be easy, and I'll see you next time.